So it is my beautiful task to welcome all of you and thank you for joining in this conversation, which we have called a necessary conversation. And we're really delighted that you're here, whether we're 10 people or we're 10,000 people, as writers, storytellers, compassionate existers in our world. Communication is at the essence of our resistance and our survival. So I am delighted to be here as a co speaker with Deena Metzger, who is beloved friend, mentor, writing teacher, co mischief maker. And many things have changed since we met, maybe it wasn't even a month ago, to talk about Deena's remarkable book, which was published by Wolfgang Andrea, who's here, the brother of um, Aina Andrea, who the book is really inspired by and her life. So Wolfgang, I'm sure Deena has welcomed you, and we have just so delighted that you're here, poignantly delighted. It's hard to use all these really wonderful words, but in a way that is part of our resistance. And even part of Deena and I deciding not to wear black today, which was what we felt, but to put on our um, sort of, I don't know, American Jewish powwow clothing. So, since the book and our conversation, so much has changed that it makes the context of this book even more important to us. And not only has it changed in these weeks, but it's changed this morning. And possibly by the time we finish this conversation, it will change again. So it is part of why it is so significant to be together and have this discussion. What is taking place some months ago might have been unimaginable, or something we could imagine and talk about, something that happened before that we thought could never happen here or throughout the entire world. It is dangerous, but it has been in plain sight for a long time. This morning, for instance, all of us were able in live time to watch six fully armed stormtrooper booted masked men throw a young man without a mask, without a weapon, onto the ground, throttle him, and then shoot him. And then, almost like startled or confused children, run away, come back, but not a single person bend down to find if he was still alive. And also this morning, I was able online to just download and read through the Project 2025 mission statement, which is thousand something pages, that describes not what is going to happen, but what is happening. So that's kind of the context, the frame of this conversation. Your being here is really important. We hope that you're not going to think of yourselves as just bystanders, but that this will also provoke conversation and insight, because we need all of us together individually active, but also heartfully together. And I wanted to open this conversation and turn it over to Deena and ask her really to talk about what has changed, because that is so utterly dramatic and important for us. Some background of the book and also what has reshaped how we look at the book. So, Deena, my dear beloved friend.
My dear beloved Laura, who I know you don't remember, but I remember when we first met. I think it was about 50 years ago when
Impossible, huh?
you gave a talk at USC about Isaac Bashevis Singer. And you don't remember. You were marvelous. Uh, and since that time, we have shared so very much, and how important it is to be a storyteller, because telling the story is what matters. And to show just very quickly what has changed, we would not imagine that what I'm going to show you would be the front page of CNN before today. This woman in the left-hand corner is disabled. She happened to be stuck in traffic trying to get to a doctor's appointment. They made her walk to wherever they were detaining her, even though she said she was not able. Some, I don't know, 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, Wolfgang, who is here, contacted me to find out if I remembered his sister and what I could tell him about her suicide in 1975. I did not remember her. And he persisted, and the book, The Story That Must Not Be Told, emerged. I don't really think it was Wolfgang. I think it was his sister. I think it was the ghost of his sister acting through him, contacting me so that we would be meeting at this moment, so that we would understand what is happening in this country at this moment. I mean, today, January 24th, where another man has been killed, murdered, as Laura says. When I was, as I say in the book, inveigled into writing this book, it was very, very frightening to write what I did. There was only one person that I knew that was saying that we were engaged in the United States in fascist ways of being. Timothy Ryback, who works at The Hague, a historian who works at The Hague, was writing about the history of the Hitler regime. And what he was writing was showing us the relationship between Hitler's playbook and the playbook in the United States. It was terrifying to write those words in the book. But by the time August came, there was no doubt in my mind, August 2025, there was no doubt in my mind that I had to do it. and that was and would continue to be my form of resistance, to tell the story, like simply to share this or to write this Substack with these images. Which I posted yesterday. So this is from ProPublica. And these images, New York Times. This happened on Wednesday. You might be able to see sort of the man's face under, I don't know if this is a hand or a foot. I'm afraid it's a foot. Maybe it's a hand. This is a face. And this is pepper spray in his eyes. And here is resistance. Here is resistance. Here's Laura. This is the advertisement for this talk. Laura says, so much has changed since the last conversation. We are not alone in seeing ICE as brown shirts, untrained, violent thugs. And so the conversation has a lot of new breath, the book itself, the despair that either drives us to action or suicide from incredible despair, and the book as the truth sharing that has to happen. And here we are in Minnesota, near the Whipple Federal Building. Here is a sign, Nuremberg Trials 2. And the statement by 6 congresspeople, including Senator Mark Kelly, who is being investigated for it, who say you can refuse illegal orders. You can refuse illegal orders. You must refuse illegal orders, they said. No one has to carry out orders that violate the law or our Constitution. So simply by being here, simply by showing up, we are saying no. And when I went out to pray this morning, I found myself saying, this can't happen. This trajectory that we seem to be on must not happen. And for myself, I think it has 2 parts that occur simultaneously. One is a very, very loud no, and the constant willingness to hold up the mirror to what is happening, unnerving or frightening as that might be. And the other is to say a very, very loud yes to what matters in life and to live very vitally, as vitally as I can, in camaraderie with others, in creating a niche of beauty and meaning and wisdom, so that when we say no, we say we know what we're saying yes to. That's where it takes me to start. Or I wish I didn't have to start with those images, but that's what we woke up to this morning.
Thank you, Deena. And while you were speaking, I was thinking of two things. I mean, many things, but one, I was thinking of how glad I am that you're being recorded at this moment with what you're saying, um, because you are our elder and your entire life has been devoted to justice and the power of story. And also, I'm really struck by your red cape and the pink walls, and even Wolfgang's red and my red, that we're honoring the memory of Wolfgang's sister Ina, who seems to be the motivation. She was a wonderful painter, performance artist with a very deep heart that found it impossible to live with something. And the last note, tell me if I'm right, Wolfgang, I think the last note that she wrote was that I love you all, but I can't bear this. Something to that. And I've been thinking a great deal about that and story. Deena and I chose to call this series of conversations, which in a way we thought would be one conversation, but that's shifted like everything else, and called it Story is Resistance. And so someone might poo-poo that and say, oh yeah, a story. What does that do? But regardless of all the violence of the world and its attempt to mask um, the power of authenticity, integrity, decency, and compassion, that truth is inextinguishable. It may be that tiny drop of water that falls on a stone and begins to melt that stone, but nonetheless, without that, the stone does not dissolve. Now, I woke up, I'm going to talk a little bit about storytelling, and then I know Deena is going to talk about story and truth telling and the responsibility of the writer today. But I woke up 2 days ago, no doubt thinking about this, about what's happening, and thinking about our meeting again. And I had the most unusual dreams. There were four dreams, but there were no images in these dreams. It was myself in the dream and a sentence and attempting to create a story about this sentence, but it was the sentence. And like most stories, the power or what haunts us from a story is the image. An image stays with us. We can't, it infiltrates us, it penetrates us. And this sentence in these four dreams was, a child was walking with blood on his shoe. And all day long, I thought, what was that? And quite accidentally, or not accidentally, I read a piece that actually I wrote, which was inspired by a prompt that Deena had given once. And it was the retelling of a story that a woman in Rwanda heard from a boy. And I wanted to tell it to you rather than talk about why is storytelling resistance and powerful. I'll tell you this little story because it embodies it. This boy woke up in Rwanda in a river of blood under a pile of mutilated bodies that included his mother and father. And in some kind of trance-like state and not remembering, he made his way out of the water, seeking air and light, and went home. And he climbed into his parents' fresh, sheeted bed and lay down to sleep and had a sleep of no dreams. And in the middle of the night, the man who had massacred these bodies came into the same house, lay down beside the boy on clean sheets, setting a machete on the dresser next to the bed, and slept with no dreams. And in the middle of the night, seeking comfort, the two, the child and the murderer, in their sleep, fell into each other's arms as comfort. And the boy awoke early, moved and saw and recognized the man who he had seen split his mother in two with a machete. And he saw the machete on the dresser, rested. He very quietly made his way out of the house to hide in the bush. So I give you Deena.
And to live to tell the story.
Mm.
I happen to be reading a book now called The Lost Children's, let's say, Legacy.
Is it
Probably not.
archive? Lost Children's Archive?
Yes, Lost Children's Archive. Thank you. In which there is a young man who is riding, right now, he's riding on the Beast, on the train that goes from Mexico, hopefully, toward the United States. But he has walked and walked and walked and walked to that train gondola. And his feet are bloody. So when Laura told me about the bloody feet that she dreamed and the story it brought up for her, and it immediately connected to this story that I'm reading, which is a true story, as hers is a true story. As the dream spirits call us to know this now, why this cruelty at this time? And how shall we live to mitigate it? You know, one cruelty leads to another. One of the cruelties is collaboration. One of the cruelties is going along with what is unbearable. So to live on behalf of that little boy who is hiding in the brush, what a story does is require us to be with that child, to imagine in our body, spirit, heart, what it is like to hide in the brush after your entire family has been slaughtered. but we're also being asked to imagine what it's like to be that young man in the bed who killed with his machete. This was not an older man, this was another young man. That's what happened in Rwanda. What happened to him? How was he turned into that? And the man who shot the man in Minnesota, who was he? Why was he so terrified? How was he trained? Oh dear, the light is happening again. Try that. How was he trained? And who are those in power who are training them in that way, who think nothing about shooting someone? Or what we are seeing over and over again, one man on the ground or one woman, and four, five, six men piled on top with the determination to crush the head against the tarmac. Let's do something here. That any better? And we're back.
It's okay. Yeah, you're great, Deena. It's just fine.
Okay. Well, whatever we do, the light is determined, right, to be here. So that's where we have to go with it. Um, you know, I have to tell you what's really hard about right now, this moment, about talking to you, is that I am completely and absolutely heartbroken. I am completely and absolutely out of my mind. And I cannot believe that this is happening in the United States. I don't know what to say about that.
Something that I wanted that came to my mind. I mean, what can I say? Because I think we're all in that place where every part of our habit and our bones want to say, oh, yeah, it's going to stop, or it's changed, or it's really not that bad, or it's really not happening everywhere. But it is. Although there's also this conversation, this us being here together, there's us being here with Wolfgang, there's us, the light shining on your face. And I was thinking about another aspect of story and how story is resistance. Because there's the telling of the truth, there's the witnessing, there's what you're doing, which is speaking completely from the heart. And then there's what happens when we hear a story, which is we don't always look at that because we're so caught up in like what the content is. But what happens? And I think you refer to what you're saying, Deena. And for me, this is one of the important things about telling stories at this time and how we tell the story and how we understand what we're doing. That when someone is hearing a story, they are not witnessing it. They are literally becoming it. And they're becoming all the sides of this story. So as you said, we listen to a story like that and we are not, we are the murderer, the perpetrator. We are the boy. We are the water filled with blood. We are the sky that's not mentioned. We're the clean sheets. We're the hiding. were the unknown of whether or not this man even woke and knew what he did. And that's very important that we, one, recognize our interdependence, and two, that that part of us that is capable of murder is also acknowledged and felt, imagined.
Want to come in and uh,
Please.
argue with you a little
Okay,
bit,
please
um,
do.
because I'm taking issue with what I have heard and what has felt like one must say that one is capable of doing what was done. And I want to argue with that,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
not to enhance me in any way,
Mhm, I
but
understand.
to say that enough of us need to be able to say, I would not do that. I
Yes.
cannot do that. Maybe as a human being, I have the capacity, but I personally know that I cannot do that. And well, I remember a moment. I remember a moment when I was at a community college. It was the end of my first year. I had never gone to my own graduations of college or graduate school or whatever for whatever reason. And I had, for the very first time, the graduation robes and hat right by my desk. And I was alone in this big office in which I had one cubicle. I had just finished finally reading all the papers and grading everyone. And I did what any woman does at that time. I emptied my purse on the desk. Finally, after a year, right? Excuse me, I'm going to clean this purse. And that moment, I had a gun at my head, and and I was raped. And after it happened, there was a knock at the door.
Mm.
The words that came out of me was, "Get out of yourself.
Say
Get out
again?
here, save yourself."
Right. Hmm. Right.
Had I had a gun, would I have shot him?
No.
No. And maybe more of us have to say, I won't. Not I can't. I
Thank you. I think actually, Dina, I appreciate that because I think it actually makes clearer what what is the consideration about it's not so I thank you. That is really helpful. So what's happening in a way is that one, you know you won't do it, and the other is that the paradox, the beyond logic that happened in the essence of that moment in the story is not only something for us to contemplate, but it undoes our attachment to our fear based on opinions or taking sides. It's something greater. Once in after a massacre in Mexico, in Monterrey, Mexico, the Dalai Lama was asked to speak, and he was talking about compassion and a woman whose entire family had been massacred in a vast auditorium. I mean, I was a very small part of this event, but it was a vast auditorium of 9,000 people. But her rage with the Dalai Lama was so incredible that you could hear it like a bell ringing, like a hammer in this space. And he stopped everything and had a microphone given to her. And she just railed and said, I don't know, like how you can have compassion for murderers, how you can have compassion for terrorists, for um, violent. It went on and on and on. And he said, you're right. I do not condone that, but I also have compassion. And for the first time, it actually pulled out the threads because I too had this similar experience, which I'm not going to tell. So, but of, having a knife at my throat, the guy asking me for, saying, give me your money or I'll kill you, and realizing at that moment I was going to die. And in the utter calm of knowing I was dying, I actually looked at him and it was so intimate.
Mm.
It was so intimate. And this doesn't always happen this way at all, And he just said, I'm sorry. I'm really sick and I don't mean to hurt you.
Mm. Oh,
And he walked away. And then there were these two white guys behind a tree coming up and they said, hey, you okay? You okay? Well, let's go get them. And I said, no, I don't. And they just said, asshole, and pushed me. And all the fear that had been absent during the moment, just like I just crumbled like a piece of paper to the ground. And realized that if those guys had come out at that moment, I would be dead. That what occurred, which I mean, and the thing is that, as you said, it doesn't always occur like that. But that's what happened. And that for me is a story worth telling because it's not so much, oh, this is going to happen, if you do this, this will happen. But these possibilities, these parts of ourselves that are not touched by violence can stay, have integrity, and be present in the moment. So we may need to act. We may need to act with fierceness in ways that we never imagined, confronted by what's happening. But this place has to remain available to us.
for me, having to act has been uh, writing this book and having to say
Mm-hmm.
in August in print, Hitlerism and Trumpism are the same.
Yeah.
And and having to say, given the family that I come from, that genocide is happening. Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinian people. Having to say that in print. And I suppose, see if I can do this
Mm.
again. Simply posting these images. Simply bearing witness.
Mm.
But I have to say, from the story that you told, the image that stays with me that I may never be able to erase is the two of them in bed together.
Yeah.
The other images do not stay with me,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
but I see a young boy and another boy slightly older in quasi military uniform
Right. Yeah.
and a and their arms around each other.
Yeah. What is that to remember that image?
It's the impossibility of the no enemy way as the only way and the
Mm-hmm.
impossible way. And I have to hold that right now with those men who are being so badly treated as members of ICE in the way that they are being recruited and the ways they are being trained and what is happening to their mind and spirit, and that they their souls are being distorted. And when I say no, I have to say no to that.
Mm,
I have
yeah.
to say no, you may not do that to
Mm,
young men. And who are these men? They're probably out of work. Why are they out of work? Why is there no work? Why is there no decent living? And why have their domestic lives been so violent?
mm,
And why have they been taught the eroticism of guns? What is wrong with our culture
mm,
that these stormtroopers, which was terrifying for me to write that in the article on Substack. Um, and because I was afraid, I did it.
mhm, mm. Deena, there's something that I saw on one of these things scrolling one day with this guy, Buvino, is that his name? He's the one of the, you know,
Bovino.
muckety mucks of ICE. And when you see him, he's like the kid that you knew in high school, the kid abused as a child. He's dressed in Gestapo clothing. He's walking in front with this incredible bravado and saying things, as you pointed out, which you can tell the story later in Davos about, sort of defending ICE and so forth and so on. But there was a moment that was caught. It was not somebody meant to film this, but it was when, under his um, violent act, these ICE guys took over the city hall in Minneapolis. He was up on a balcony overlooking this incredible, room where there's a kind of star, six-pointed star on the floor, the representative of everything that, means democracy, this kind of Stella Maris, the, rose star of justice and so forth. And it was a moment that the camera flashed on him and he was awkwardly laughing. And I just saw this kid in disbelief that his sort of weak life had actually allowed him to like break into his parents' bedroom and, shit on the bed. It was a kind of that kind of sort of moronic laughter, nervous moronic laughter. And I keep wanting to find it again because it was so startling. And he was so familiar. So that's all I could answer of what is this?
You know, and I think it's really important to say here also that this is not universal,
Mhm.
that
It's true.
these ways of being are not universal. This is Euro American.
That's
This
right.
is essentially white Euro American culture. And I'm thinking of the times that I was in Zimbabwe, for example, and spending time with Mandaza and his, who remembers how many, 12 children or something like that. And um, there were like three little children his children that were under 5, right? And
And
they,
this is Mandava the elephant,
the one who was with us, who took us to the elephant. Yeah,
just so people know who they can visualize this
right. And his,
great elephant.
no, no, this is not the elephant. This is a
Oh,
person.
oh, okay.
No, no, we can talk about the elephant
Oh,
children.
really?
Absolutely, and they're not aggressive. And
Mm, mm,
this is
okay.
a person. This is a poor person. This
Mm,
is a poor person, a Black person in a in an urban setting, trying to be or succeeding in being a Nanga and being a medicine person. And he has all these children, and they are, 1 year old, 2 year old, 3 year old, 4 year old, whatever, And one of them or two of them are on the backs of the older boys, the way the
mm,
women carry the babies with a towel, the boys do that as well. And then we have Adara, we have a healing ceremony. And the 5 year old knows by the story that's being told what herbs to go and get.
mm,
7 year old lights the cigar for the father. And they sit there and they listen. They are not, they are not aggressive like
mhm,
our children. They are not distracted. They are not living in this electromagnetic industrial culture that we have created, though we know it's bad for us, but it makes money. And so we create it. And so we're not all capable of murder,
mhm.
and we're not all aggressive. And all cultures are not aggressive.
Maybe this is the answer to this question of the cruelty that arises so spontaneously when this upbringing, this embrace of upbringing in which you are part of a world view in which you are loved and precious, not your money or your but you as a human being are part of the whole system. That's a very different way of being, a very different outcome.
You know, I don't know the rest of the people here, but I don't have television. And that means that I do not watch murder every day. That is murder for entertainment. I see it in the news, but I don't see it otherwise. And to create a culture in which almost every story must have a murder in it, a murder, a chase for a murderer, etc. That's really insane. I mean, it's
Well, it's very often the fact in myth, but it's very different when it is told within a particular cultural context of orality and listening. These are just images without any intelligence or symbolism. It's just pure, like detached from everything violence.
yeah. And a myth doesn't may have it, but doesn't have to have it.
Yes, and it's very different because it's not violent. It's
And the
forced.
gods don't say, we're not going to let you be a myth because you don't have murder and it's not interesting to us.
Except when you become a myth in a Western culture, translated. But that's a
Yeah.
whole other.
So
Yeah,
I,
I just want to say so that right after 9/11, I was sent by an organization into public schools downtown, not far from. the World Trade Center. And I asked and I was to tell stories and get the kids to converse. And I asked the kids, I was told to ask the kids how they were affected. And, somebody said, I'm not afraid of anything. Somebody said, oh, no, 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 I saw it on television. And then this kid stood up and he said, I'm going to kill every Arab. And I thought, this is a third grader. This is a third grader. He has no relationship to anything. And so therefore I then told them all a fairy tale.
What did you tell them?
I told them it's a Norwegian story called The Giant with No Heart. It's about a giant who really was turning people to stone. And the bravado of the older brothers who go off and they get turned to stone. And then the youngest one who um, sort of feeds the fish and feeds the raven and helps the wolf along the way. So, eventually he discovers through the kindness of a princess who is kidnapped and kept prisoner, he's told this, you can't kill this giant. He has no heart. And he said, but if he has no heart and he's alive, where does he keep his heart? So she finds out where the heart is. And in the story, with the help of the wolf and all these other animals who have said, if you don't kill me, if you don't destroy me, I'll help him. And he returns with the heart. And in the story, of course, he kills the giant. But there I was facing all these kids. So I said, well, this is a story. And he did, well, at first I asked them what he would do with the egg. And so the egg with the heart inside, and they had all these things to say, smash it, get rid of it, make an omelet, as kids would do. And then and they said, well, what happened? What happened? Even the kid was going to kill all the animals. What happened? What happened? And I said, actually, he put the heart back in the giant. And the giant began to shake and to cry, and he let the princess go. And they said, well, what occurred? I said, well, all the stones turned back to people. They went back and they had a wedding, a wedding. Oh no. I said, yeah, but right before the wedding, there was a knock on the door. And who do you think it was? And these kids who were not afraid, they said, the giant. I said, yeah. What happened? They said, I said, the giant said, I'm so lonely.
I'm going to cry from this story.
And so they invited him to the wedding. And I said, the giant said, I have a lot of power. So he protected the forest and he protected all the people and he protected the palace. I said, and that's how it was. And some of the kids said, happily ever after. And somebody said, that's impossible. And I said, well, until the story starts again. And then that's all I did for weeks was tell that story with the kids, including all their responses constantly. Not because it could put in their minds the possibility of something and reach them in a place where nobody was telling them they could be reached, that they are the youngest son. They are the princess who has the cleverness to find out where the giant's heart is hidden. How we doing, Deena? How we doing for time? And
We have an hour, so exactly. So it's also a time if people want to also speak. I'm thinking of a really great myth, even though it was written by someone, um, of the Tin Man who
mm,
has no heart,
right,
and
the
how,
Wizard of Oz.
right, and how we are struggling with that story of what it means not to have a heart. And
Mm,
that more than anything, the Tin Man wants a heart. The Tin Man reminds me of these stormtroopers
Mm.
who are made to dress in that way. They cover themselves with military paraphernalia so that they are really metal and they are impenetrable and they must not have a heart. They're not allowed to talk to anyone. They can't say, could you roll down your window and let's have a conversation? And who in his or her or their right mind would roll down their window when it is so dangerous? And you hope that somehow you're going to get away from them because it's not going to be a conversation.
The other thing that uh, I'm thinking of is I don't know if you ever read this book, A Stranger Died Here Last Night. Pumla, I forget her last name, South African black woman who was a lawyer whose family, of course, had been damaged tremendously by apartheid, was given the job of interviewing de Klerk when he was in prison. And she sat with him week after week, month after month. The most extraordinary thing that happened in this book and why she wrote the book was, which was so hard to understand, that at one moment, de Klerk admitted that he didn't realize the harm he had done. To commit such immense um, criminal activity, such inhumane activity, and not to be aware of it. And when he realized it, he begged for her forgiveness. And like you with the rape, what astounded this woman was that she put her hand on his hand and then walked out of the prison in disbelief that she had done that. And yet she understood that at that moment, she was no longer a victim.
How often this has happened. The interview in the prison cell. I don't remember his name. He was the Nazi architect. And I remember
You think
reading,
of Goebbels?
no, with an
No,
S.
he never realized what he never admitted what he did.
No, um, he was literally an architect.
Spear, probably Spear.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Thank you, Wolfgang.
Yep. So
And,
that we know.
and he had, or so they say, remorse and understanding that came in part through that interview of the journalist
Mm.
and and the prisoner. Um,
Mm.
I'm wondering what people are thinking
Yeah, and I'm
because
wondering if that's what it takes. Like if that, should
it's
we put on gallery view, Sarah, so that we could see everybody? And if you would like to say something or ask a question, you could either do put the little hand up on React or raise your hand.
Susan, come in, please.
Um, I just am flooded with all this, the stories. There's a lot I would like to share from the high to the low. And one of them is storytelling is an act of resistance because storytellers, in so many ways, are the historians. We remember the stories and so they never die.
Hmm.
And in that sense, we've been here before, but nobody has listened to our stories. I taught anthropology for about a year in a boys' reformatory. And the guys I taught were Hispanic and Black, 2 American Indians. And they were about to graduate from the reformatory at the ripe old age of, at that time, 19. And they would either be released or sent to the big prisons. And we talked about a lot of things. And I realized that I had to throw everything out the book. And it was illegal to smoke. But of course, I was a smoker at the time, and I couldn't get through these sessions. But I couldn't walk out through the 6 gated doors out. So I found that if I could go outside this one, I didn't have a classroom. They put me in an abandoned room. I could smoke. And I saw that it became a game in the classroom as to who would go out and talk to the white teacher.
Hmm.
And it turned out to be a reward because I would share my cigarette with whoever came out. And I had fascinating conversations. But one of the ones I remember most vividly was a young Black guy who was in there because at the age of 15, he had stomped another gang member to death. We're talking about classes. And he said, we're not unteachable.
Hmm.
We're just untaught.
Hmm.
Oh, wow.
And so I went back in, and that session was informal teaching, all the aphorisms you're brought up with, how you form a family, get to fictive kin if you have no family of your own. And this was before I knew about storytelling. But the boys or young men who managed the best out of the class, they were leaders of their gangs before they'd been caught. And I realized that what was important was they all needed family and love and constancy, and they wanted to feel proud of themselves. So I spent a couple of weeks on that. The other thing I'd like to say, and then I'll be quiet. Well, 2 more things. Who are our heroes? If I look at the generations that have followed me, we don't have good heroes for our young men anymore. And I can remember my first husband was a Vietnam War veteran, and he suffered from terrible PTSD. And he had that moment that you were talking about with the young man in the rotunda of Minneapolis. He was wealthy. He could have bought his way out of the draft. but he'd been brought up to believe that what he was doing was patriotic. He became an Army pilot and was decorated at a Bronze Star and a Purple Star. And he came home, and it took him 6 months. And he joined Vietnam Veterans Against the War. It broke him when he realized that on so many different levels, it was not a patriotic war. And so when I see these young men, I keep thinking about Bob. They've been lied to. They get to dress up and be cowboys, and everybody else is Indians. And I agree with Deena in that. Well, I'll mix it. Storytellers can tell you that there's so many ways to be a hero or a heroine without ever having to use a gun.
Thank you, Susan.
That's why we have to keep telling stories. It's all about choice. You need an alternative to violence. But we need to remember so we don't repeat the past.
Thank you so much. I want to turn the conversation to what I think we've gathered to talk about, which is resistance. It's story as resistance, or how we meet these times, or what we're called to at this moment. And because what I think we need to do is to change the situation that Ina was involved in. The woman who called, all in a way, is calling all of us together. And maybe I'll read this passage, or if that's okay. Just
Of course,
the
yeah.
one that changed everything, and that was for me at the very core, at the center of the story, the very center of the story, where I was sitting with Wolfgang and Micheline, who is here now, also, and we had this conversation. Wolfgang, Micheline, and the writer are speaking amicably about Ina. This is the first visit. More than 2 hours have passed. This may be the time that Wolfgang says casually that Ina had not wanted to take her grandmother's money when she was studying in Düsseldorf, where she taught English to support herself. However, she had no choice but to accept it when she came to the United States and the Feminist Studio workshop. Why didn't she want to take her grandmother's money? It was her grandmother's inheritance from Bloem and Voss. What is Bloem and Voss? Bloem and Voss was the largest shipbuilding and engineering company in Germany, once the largest in the world. They also became an aircraft manufacturing company under Hitler. Long silence. Then, as if another question had been asked, yes, Wolfgang said. She tried to commit suicide by jumping off a dock right next to Bloem and Voss, dressed elegantly with a bouquet of flowers in her hands. Ina came to Los Angeles in 1974 and committed suicide in 1975 at a remote outcropping in Death Valley alone. And what the book traces, and I think appropriately, listening to what Ina's saying, is that she could not bear living knowing what her grandparents and great grandparents had done. So I have great grandchildren. My grandchildren will know what I did during the war. I assume my great grandchildren will ask, what did she do? And that means that we have to ask what we are doing, how we are meeting these times. And story is one way. It is certainly not the only way. I'm thinking of Susan saying we have no heroes. And I'm thinking about Mark Kelly. Oh my goodness, if we have an American hero, is he not one? An astronaut, someone who was involved in combat, and someone who says now, with an aside, I may be running for president, says you must not follow an illegal order. That to me is an American hero. But the important thing is not the heroes. The important thing is what we do. And I think that's why Laura and I are together today. Understanding that it's our turn. That, like it or not, afraid or not, it is our turn. And I look at those of you who are on the screen. We're old enough to have a turn. We think about all of those people in the past who have confronted fascism, without whom we might not be alive now. And so, how do we meet this? And if we don't meet it with violence, then that's another challenge, isn't it? That we meet these times determinedly and without violence. Laura, it looks like you're going to say something, so please come.
No, I don't have in front of me the speech that the Prime Minister of Canada made, and how extraordinary that people like Mark Kelly and like Carney are speaking. No, I think you said it. And it's each one of us has to look at what it is that we individually do, because sometimes we think, well, I'm doing so little because this is such a big thing. But it is the communal dedication of each of us.
Yeah. Yeah. And, we have Governor Walz, right? Who is almost vice president. And oh dear, wouldn't it be wonderful if he were vice president now? What a different world we will be in. There's another hero. It's quite an extraordinary example to watch him and the mayors just say, no, this is not okay.
Yeah, or the woman who said when Renee Good was shot, can I go and see what if she has a pulse? It is each of those actions that are important. She wasn't allowed, or he wasn't allowed, but nonetheless, that is said. That that happens.
She was a physician.
Yeah.
Unconscionable not to allow a physician.
It's just for some reason I'm thinking of George Floyd's little girl. After the demonstrations and people asking her how she was, and this little, I think, was she 5 or 7 years old, when she said, "I really miss my daddy, but I am so happy because my father changed the world."
So, if there if no one wants to speak, you might have questions for
It'd
us.
be wonderful to hear from people, actually. Even if it's just how you feel.
Or what you would like to explore.
And I would love to hear, Cheryl, what you're thinking. May I summon my storytelling sister?
Well, the book is really remarkable for these times. And what strikes me as storytellers is how the story came to be. Now, the family kind of knew the story. Wolfgang knew the story. And Deena doesn't remember her. Yet she came into this world to have this story come into life as an ancestor in these times. And I'm looking at where we're at in these times in relation to the ancestors and how the story is so alive now. And I guess my question would be, what is the relationship that you see now after writing the book, Deena, in these times in regards to what happened with the ancestors on those docks?
I feel so many different things. One is I feel a comfort from her presence. Even though what she points out is so frightening about what is happening in this time, there is this spirit who I know can't protect us, but she is calling our attention to what is happening. We would not have this conversation. It would not occur to Laura and I, though it should have, perhaps, without Ina, that we gather together with you and talk about resistance. But maybe she's saying, my grandparents did not know what they were doing. They did not have consciousness to understand how criminal their actions were, how much harm they did, and how much violence they facilitated. But you must not collaborate. And the ways of collaboration are subtle. Mm-hmm. And so I guess maybe it's not because of Ina, but maybe it is. I get up in the morning and instead of really looking at the beauty of the light on the leaves, I go and read the Times and the Guardian because I want to know if the world is alive. And I want to know what we must know and be aware of. And I want to know what I can say yes to and what I can say no to. And I also think, Cheryl, that when we have these conversations, because you are a Native woman, you say, rightly so, this is not new. Euro-Americans have done this to my people forever. This country is stained with blood. And so I need to learn how to live. And I need to communicate the need to learn how to live so that this doesn't continue. That's where it takes me. That's where she takes me.
I told Deena about seeing a video this morning of, I think it's Choctaw, mostly Choctaw people. Is that true, Cheryl? In Minneapolis, like hundreds of people dancing in the street. That was their demonstration in full regalia in the freezing cold. Summoning spirit, dancing on the earth, feathers on their sleeves and bells on their skirts, male and female.
Well, that's been the resistance for over 500 years, is the dances. And also the ghost dance. And the fear that was brought upon the European in and then killing the dancers. So we are seeing it in the streets now as people are doing the dance of whatever dance they're doing, being brought in and killed. So it is a culture that has done this for hundreds of years, not thousands. And that has, so may we hold the prayers and the dances.
Prayers and the dances and the care for the earth, right? Those three.
And care for each other.
And care for each other, for community. Yeah. So I too feel, I mean, even as I'm here, I guess I am the elder. It's hard to believe I got to this place. But I do feel like I'm, somehow taking care of all of you also that is my task, and I want to do one of these things, like just
Yeah.
hold you in my arms, and uh, Jane knows I love those hearts going up. That's the kid in me.
But isn't that a sort of profound act of resistance? To
Well,
love, as Hafiz said, to love the way one loves.
yeah, yeah, and to commit oneself to it. You know, that sense when I invite spirit and turn to the south and, say, great heart of the universe. I mean, to know that spirit is a great heart. I remember being at Canyon de Chelly, just being awed by the beauty of Canyon de Chelly and saying, oh my God, this beauty has a great heart.
Mm. Huh.
Right? The beauty of the earth exists because of the heart of spirit. They're belong together. They are together. They're one and the same. And so no matter what, to commit ourselves, we do what we do because it's right, but we do what we do because we love. That's the heart speaking. And yeah.
Maybe we should take a small pause, and then it may come to some people that you have something to say. And don't worry about whether what you have to say is important or big. It's just our voices. Um, and your silence is welcome, of course, because
Like
of
Ellen
your
wants to come in. I don't know if she unmuted deliberately,
Yeah.
but why not come in, Ellen?
Thank you. I did unmute.
Well,
So one thing that I am left with is this image of the interview in the prison. And what is the role of the writer? Because this journalist had to have enough heart for this man, as closed as he was, to open his enough to have some realization. And my sense is that as writers, we have to be a bridge, I think, from our own hearts to what's there, out there as well. I'm thinking of the instance with Laura, with the man who in that moment confessed, said, I'm sick. I don't want to do this. And Deena also, that sense, that stop. And then for a moment of clarity, and then to communicate that.
Yeah. Thank you, Ellen, for that.
yeah. Marjorie, are you saying something? You're muted. No, I guess not.
Maybe speaking to someone. Linda.
Sometimes what I feel, Deena, about the book and Ina's story, but Ina's presence, because you do speak of her as she's right here. The ghost has visited, and you and Wolfgang and Michelina, you've sat with her, and I in a way, I feel like she's calling us all into council to sit with some complexity, to love your grandmother and then to know what your grandmother did and to hold that all in one heart. And I think there's something so powerful about that. It's like if we can remember, and that was too much for her to hold. And perhaps if she could have sat in council with many people who were in that story too, if she could have managed it. I think she was very porous to all the parts of this that were so hard. And so I hold her in that way. And I feel really called as an act of resistance to hold the people that are working for ICE in that way. That I don't want to erase in my experience their humanity, and I can't see their humanity, and I don't know what Ina did with that, what she could feel from her grandmother, and then what she knew about her grandparents, and how that worked its way in her. But I feel very committed to staying in resistance to using any pejorative names for ICE, to calling them out with words that are hateful or not remembering their humanity. There's something about resisting my own humanity disappearing and holding humanity in this. I'm not sure where more to go with that, but I know that in my own thinking, my own stories, my own words about what's happening when I tell those stories, even in the morning, like, oh, did you see what happened on the news? To not forget that, and not to forget the complexity, and to tell the stories of those who are being hurt with heart, and somehow remembering Ina and all of that. So I so thank you and Laura both for the storytelling and for the story that came through, and Wolfgang for bringing this, and Ina for ghosting us. So that's what I offer today.
I think what's interesting is that Ina has become a living mythic figure. Because I don't know what it's like for you, Wolfgang and Micheline, to hear Ina spoken about in this way as a character that we will, a living character. Yes, you're right. She's right here. She's right here. And what an amazing thing that is.
I do have something to say, of course, because actually, well, the grandmother already died in 1930. But I'm getting maybe too much into details. But of course, there are some things which somehow are getting a bit historically not right in the right dimension. And of course, the question is, in general now, why didn't the grandparent resist is more the question, and not what they, as far as I'm concerned, did actively. So this is a bit of a different thing than now the ICE people there. So but I don't want to actually distract from with these historical footnotes to the bigger major question, which is, of course, which we here in Europe, of course, follow very closely. But of course, we have all this that little Greenland episode in between, and so. But actually, the Greenland episode, so that's actually more really a curious thing he's done there. But furthermore, but I think it's we really are following these things very sadly from my side, because of course I still have, as I was in the States, in Philadelphia for 3 years as a kid, and that these years were very important for me, and it was actually the bright time which I remember. And this is, of course, is rather gray and dark now, what we hear.
And you were born in Canada, actually, right?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I heard, of course, the speech of Mark Carney, and I think he's really on the right track, and I hope that some of our European politicians will cherish this and really pick it up, and we
Are you a
go
Canadian
on that.
citizen now?
Sorry?
Are you a Canadian citizen too?
No. My father was a diplomat, and so I wasn't able to become Canadian citizen. So I tried, and that was denied.
It's too bad. It's probably the passport to have at this
Yeah, it's not. It's always good.
point. Yeah.
It brings up for me, Wolfgang, the whole issue of wealth and money as religion in the Western world and other places in the world now too, that it's replaced, spiritual story. It is what people seek, that allows people to do all kinds of unspeakable things in the pursuit of money.
And then there's the other side of this remarkable moment that Wolfgang and Micheline and I are sitting in this circle next to each other. And that he also published this book, that this book is the result of his efforts. And
And of course, that you wrote it, Deena. That's the essential side of it, and as I always say, I'm always very grateful and thankful to you that you did this really tough work. It was really a very great interaction, I found, and so that this came out.
Yeah. I mean, this is the answer, right? That we are comrades in this, absolutely allied in this work. It is the heart opening answer to how we meet these storms.
It's very difficult to find the story that really is that needs to be told. And it took the two of you, the three of you or more, to actually uncover the story, to find the story, because the story is always for the present. And also, it's just striking me, we're talking about how suicide is so complex and how Ina's released from something through this incredible journey that you've been on. It's almost as if it's not just so much that she's become a mythic presence, but that the fulfillment of her heart, her life, is made after death. And how important that is, because we tend to think of death as the end of everything. And we know from all wisdom peoples of the world that there's something that continues. And here we are in the midst of honoring that rather than closing the door. It's quite remarkable, all the different sides of this that are important. And we have no idea how these acts actually affect the energy of existence. You know, far more powerful than a gunshot.
Yeah. I think maybe we end on this. It feels so right to end on a conversation between Wolfgang, Micheline, you, and me, that we are in alliance. It's Germany and the US and today and Ina, that we have to keep looking for alliance. Alliance is another form of resistance. And so I want to thank you, Laura. The great pleasure to be with your wisdom and your stories and your heart. Thank you, Wolfgang and Micheline, for being here. Thank you, Sarah, for helping us and making sure we can be heard and seen. And thank you, everyone, for being here. And
thank you for letting me be part of this conversation. I feel it gives me a tremendous strength to continue. And I feel just in love with all of you. And I feel Wolfgang, this kind of, and Micheline, some kind of family connection almost.
great.
So, danke vielmals.